So welcome to part 8. If you've somehow made it through all these parts, then congratulations. You deserve an award. But, reading is its own reward. Guns, Germs, and Steel. The best book. Like, if you've ever wondered, the book basically explains why Africa is poor, why Africa and South America are poor. I think everyone should read this book. Africans and white people should read this book because Africans think. I try to actually explain this to the people in my class. They really didn't understand what I was saying and they refused to read the book. So anyway, basically, people in Kenya think corruption is a problem, right? But the book essentially tries to say that people in Europe developed because they had more resources. And when he's talking about resources, he doesn't mean minerals, he's talking about resources that you need to survive. So, like 14 of the animals that were domesticated originated from the Middle East. And some of the crops uh, that worked really well came from the Middle East as well. They worked really well in the Middle East. So essentially, what he's saying is they had better access to food and animals. So they moved from hunter gatherers to being farmers. And because they had a surplus of food, it allowed for specialization. It reached a point in the community, not everyone needed to be a farmer, that someone could specialize. Someone could now be a tailor and they would specialize full time. They just do tailoring and they don't do farming at all. Someone could be like a spear maker or sword maker and they do it full time. So slowly and slowly, there was more and more and more specialization, which led to, Western society as we know it. And that those plants and animals were easier to transport along the latitudes. Like if you have a crop in like a crop across the Eurasian continent, like maybe London to like China, like it's easier as long as it's above the tropic of, is it Capricorn and OP, Cancer, above the tropic of Cancer, right? If the crop is above the tropic of Cancer, it'll do well, right? Regardless of where it is. So any crop that you can grow in uh, Western Europe can be grown in Central Europe and Eastern Europe and Asia as well. But you can't transfer a crop from outside of the tropics to within the tropics, right? It won't grow. And if you draw a line through all the major civilizations or the major cities in the world, you'll notice a lot of them reside outside of the tropics. But the ones that reside within the tropics are mainly the ones that aren't very developed, so like South America and Africa. So there is a correlation between geography and development. Like, haven't you ever wondered why South Africa and Egypt were the two most developed countries in Africa? It's because they're outside of the tropics and it was related to the crops that were grown. That's why Egypt thrived as a civilization, but the civilization couldn't be pushed further down into the tropics. So, back to the corruption example, people in Kenya are like, oh, there's so much corruption, that's what's holding the country back. Because the government steals, and yes, boy, do they steal a lot, everything, all the time. I would estimate like about half, maybe about half of our GDP or taxes are stolen, if I'm not wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if it's half. I don't know what the exact figure is. But anyway, people think that's the reason. And while it's true that Kenya would be more developed if it wasn't for corruption, the question I tried to pose to them was this: what about Europe during the period where the king literally owned everything? As in, he literally fucking owned everything, right? He literally owned all the land, everything, right? All the gold, and he didn't do anything to better the country, so to speak. Yet those guys were still able to develop, right? There was this guy called alt history who referred to Kenyans before, okay, Africans before the Europeans came as illiterate Iron Age cattle herders. So saying that Africans had not gone past the Iron Age until the Europeans came. So what I'm saying is these guys, if you look at some of those ancient cities like built in Rome or like Jesus's time, I hate to admit it, but some of those cities look more advanced than some of the African settlements here today. Not majority. I mean, I'm from Nairobi. I come from a city. Google photos of Nairobi. You'll be amazed at what you see. We have toilets and Wi-Fi and iPhones and Mercedes and all that jazz. You know, we know what burgers and pizza and ice cream is, and we all speak English. Anyone who's gone to school, because everything is taught in English. But I digress. Basically, if the king owned everything, yet these guys were still able to develop, don't you think the problem goes beyond individuals at the top eating too much of the pie? Because what I was trying to reason with them, I was trying to say, how do you explain Europe being able to develop like literature, music, art, and all those things, yet we weren't able to develop them, yet the king took more than what the corrupt leaders are taking now? But you know, they didn't want to think about it. Because they thought I was justifying corruption, which isn't what I was doing. But anyway, how I found the book is I just Googled like I had Googled like why is Africa poor? And I think this was the best book on it. And yeah, it really changed my mind. Very, very intriguing history. I think I'm just waiting for a book to be written um, about the Industrial Revolution. I don't know any book on the Industrial Revolution. So if you guys know any book on the Industrial Revolution, please let me know. I'd really like to read it about how like the steam engine and the cotton gin and the printing press. I really want to know how those revolutionized the world. The extent of my knowledge is literally just that cartoon called Time Squad, where they went back in time to help those guys. uh, there was one book called How the Scots Invented the Modern World. I didn't really think it was on par with the book. Something about the Scots founding economics, like modern economics and capitalism, and Australia. The Scots founded Australia. I might finish it someday. I think I was just not able to get a good copy of the book online. Like it was a messy EPUB, but yeah, maybe I'll finish it, but I don't think it was that good. I think I also got triggered because there was one guy who he was an atheist. This was like in what, 1500 or something like that. He said like one bad sentence and then the next day he was sentenced to death. So that kind of triggered me and I'm like, damn, I don't know, imagine living in those times. So yeah. Anyway, now one of the best authors on psychology, David J. Lieberman. So there's Never Be Lied to Again, Get Anyone to Do Anything, How to Get Anyone to Like You. I think there's another book. I'll get to the others later. So there's already did I read the book on there's another book on lie spotting as well, right? So I would say at this stage it's almost impossible to lie to me because I there are all these tricks. But the thing is you have to use some of these tricks and I don't want to really use a lot of these tricks because some of them can be a tad bit manipulative. So I just mainly rely on the body language signs if someone's lying. But some of them you don't have to use tricks. You just have to, you can just memorize it. So there's this book and there's the lie spotting book. Uh, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I'm wasting precious YouTube minutes. I'll get to it later. Yeah, Lie Spotting by Pamela Meyer. Oh, it's right there. I can't believe I didn't see it. So, Never Be Lied to Again and Lie Spotting. So, these are just a bunch, like a whole book on, a whole two books on how to spot lies, which, if you combine it with the body language book, is three books on how to spot lies, or three and a tenth of a book. So, basically, I'll just mention two of the techniques they said. So, if you're going to ask someone a question, right, and you suspect that they're gonna lie about it, just throw in a random detail and basically, so let's say someone, you ask someone like, oh, where were you, right? Where were you this on this day or whatever? And they're like, oh, I was in town, for example. They're like in the town, in the CBD. So you just say like, oh, I heard it rained. So that's the thing. It doesn't matter whether it rained or not, but because they weren't there, they'll try and think about it. They're like, oh, wait, what do I say? Did it rain? Did it not rain? So you're looking for that hesitation to see what they say, right? Yeah, you're looking for that hesitation. Another way you can, so that applies to many things, maybe you're like asking your partner. I mean, I wouldn't really do this, but you're asking your partner, where were you, or if they were at this place, and they're like, oh yeah, then you say something about that place. You're like, oh yeah, I heard this guy was there. Then they'll hesitate because they weren't there, or maybe they'll just blatantly agree with you. If they just hurriedly blatantly agree with you, they're like, oh yeah, 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 he was there, I saw him. Then you can tell, you can tell. So that's one example. A bit manipulative, but anyway, the other one, which is not really manipulation because you're not doing anything, is multiples. If someone is telling you a story and that story happens to contain either multiples or subsets of digits that all seem the same, then they're probably lying. So if they say that, oh, yeah, like at 6 o'clock we left, then at 6:20 we did this, then at 6:40 we did this, then at 7 we did this. If all those digits that they've used just happen to be multiples of 20, right? Then it's suspicious. Or if they're like, oh, it was 100 and then I gave him 80. I mean, it was like, okay, 1,000, then I gave him 800, then I kept 600. So if all those digits that just happen to be easily subtractable by 200, then that's suspicious, right? So you're trying to ascertain, like, because the mind is lazy and the mind is gonna pick digits that seem easy to remember or to calculate, right? So they're going to use multiples of certain numbers. So whether it's the amount of money or the amount of people or the time, like we're four people, then we're two, then we're six, right? It's kind of suspicious. So yeah. Anyway, there's two whole books on that. So the other techniques, I don't even remember all of the techniques, but the techniques are there. The graphology I mentioned. Art of Manipulation by R.B. Sparksman, written in either 1970 or 1972. As I said, I never recommend old books. I never recommend old books. So if I recommend an old book, it's good. So I didn't read this book to manipulate people. I just read this book to be aware of manipulation, as anti-manipulation measures. So one thing it said, which was so true, is like, well, he talks about collateral and he says that never just hand someone money, for example. Like when you hand someone something, basically they can just spit on you and leave, right? So if you don't have collateral, or if you don't have what you wanted for that person, you might never get it. And I've tried to be kind and people are still screwed me over. So yeah, like I've tried to be like, oh no, I trust them, but big mistake. So like basically if you're giving out something, right? Like if you want to give out your computer or your phone or your car, get some collateral, because once that person has that item, they can do anything with it. And things might not end well. So if you don't have collateral, you're screwed. Or maybe you have an agreement with someone. You're like, if I send you this money, will you do this? Make sure they do it first, because after they get that money, they can spit on you and leave, right? Yeah, very, very important principle. So yeah, step one, get collateral. Step two, make sure they do what you want before you give them what they want. Otherwise, they'll spit on you and leave, right? The rest he talks about many. So this guy, I don't know what he was. I don't know if he was just a guy who went and chilled with like con men and other people and stuff. But anyway, really, really good book. It's the only like 3 books on manipulation. So In Sheep's Clothing is spotting manipulation. This one was more of how to do manipulation, but it's I mean you read it for anti-manipulation. Oh yeah, with the with the lie spotting thing, another way to tell if someone's lying is if they, maybe that one was the body language book, but if they stop abbreviating words, like when, what's his face, uh Bill Clinton was like, I did not sleep with Monica Lewinsky. So when they say did not instead of didn't, then they're lying. So they're trying to be clear. They're trying to be like I did not. Because think about it. If you notice that they're not abbreviating certain words that they normally would abbreviate, they're abbreviating them. They're not abbreviating them to give the argument more confidence, right? I mean, that's probably a bad thing to share, because it makes lying easier, because you're like, yeah, yeah, not to lie, just need to not abbreviate. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I didn't do it. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. But anyway, it's a double-edged sword. Like, you read it not to be manipulated and not to do these things rather than actually doing them, you know. Up to you, up to the reader. I'm always checking time because it's a bit hard to see. Introduction to NLP by Mike Ross. Really, really good book. I guess I'll finish going through this book. Basically, he says it's like if you have a motor train, like a regular train, it kind of goes at, I don't know, 80 kilometers per hour. But then you have this bullet train that goes like at, I don't know, 300 kilometers an hour. And the difference is that that bullet train just levitates like by a few inches. Uh, and it levitates by a few inches, but it's 1,000, like, not 1,000, but it's much faster. So basically, he says he wants to get your train of thought up onto the right tracks. That's how he opens up the book. And neuro-linguistic programming is basically just saying that people process languages differently. And again, it's probably what, the fourth book on lying, because there's another lying technique that's there, which I've noticed some of my friends using, and I'm like, haha, you think you're conning me, but haha, haha, haha. Anyway, uh I mean, humans must be such awful creatures. Like, why do we need four separate books on lying? Anyway, he talks about how I'll talk about it in the next audio. I don't want these to be too long.